Oh God, I even had it plugged in. I just had the I don't know what it is with me and sound. Right, you can definitely hear me now. I mean, it feels like it can't be a live show without that, all the way beginning it like that, can it? There we go. Let's start again, shall we? Welcome along, and thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for all of you guys that have been in the chat since this afternoon. It's hilarious. Sorry about that. There were, I think, about 80 of you way earlier in the afternoon, just using this as a bit of a chat room, F1 chat room on a Monday, which I love, because I love dipping in and out and chatting to you guys, answering some questions, and it's been brilliant to just dip in and out all day long. So yeah, you can all have a good laugh about the sounds. Yeah, sorry about that. It feels like we can't do this without having some sort of cock up, technical wise. There we go. Anyway, I've got loads to talk about, because it may not have been the most exciting race on Sunday. And probably that shouldn't be a massive surprise, given that it was Barcelona. We'll talk about that more as the next hour goes on. But I've got loads of questions, probably more questions than I can possibly answer over the next hour. But we'll do our best. And of course, we'll go through whatever you're talking about on the chat as well as we go. So hello to all of you. Cornwall, Canada. I mean, we won't do this every week because it still amazes me. I'm like a kid that's just discovered some mega toy. I love it that people tune in from all over the world. I think it's fascinating. So thank you, all of you. Let's get straight into it then, because I think what I'm going to start with is the poll that I put over on the community tab earlier on, talking about Valtteri Bottas. We've got loads of topics to go through. We're definitely going to cover the party mode, potential ban on party modes. We're definitely going to cover Leclerc and his seatbelts. We're going to cover the Barcelona circuit and why it ends up being quite often a dull race, and loads of other stuff as well. But let's start by talking about Mercedes and Valtteri Bottas. So my question over on the poll was, what do you think? Can Valtteri Bottas ever beat Hamilton to become world champion? That was the question. The answers were yes, but he needs to up his game and have a little bit of luck. B, no, there's no way, because he just doesn't have what it takes and his teammate Lewis is just too good. And C, that's not what Mercedes want him for anyway, because they want him as a backup number 2 driver. Here is what you said. 2,300 of you took part in that today. Thank you very much for doing that. And there you go, 59% say no, Valtteri Bottas simply doesn't have what it takes to become world champion whilst being teammate with Lewis Hamilton. Lewis is just simply too good. Let's talk about Valtteri. Just signed a new contract for Mercedes. That's interesting, given that we can be pretty certain. I mean, by the way, I agree with that poll. I don't think he's got at the moment what it takes to overcome Lewis Hamilton. And that's no disrespect to Valtteri. Lewis is a formidable teammate, vast amount of experience, vast amount of championships. But what Valtteri hasn't got that Nico Rosberg perhaps had on that year, 2016, when he overcame him, a little bit of luck on his side first of all, but also he found a way to destabilise Lewis. He got aggressive, he got angry, he got his elbows out, he started playing mind games. I mean, tell me what you think, but is Valtteri just too nice? Is he too nice to use every trick in the book to overcome the likes of a Lewis Hamilton, which ultimately is surely what he needs to do if he wants to do something about it? So, no, he cannot, because Max will block him at every try, says Jerome Bowens. Well, Max Verstappen, this is another point, isn't it? Max Verstappen now ahead of Valtteri in the championship in a car that I think we can all agree is inferior to the Mercedes. That probably tells you quite a lot. It tells you a lot about Max, but it also tells you a lot about Valtteri, doesn't it? Let me see. Doesn't have the minerals, says Phantom Tetra. Valtteri is good, very, very good, but he misses that last magic touch, Varun Sambi. He needs more fire in his belly, says Ren T. He needs to be like Mika. I think that's it. He does need a bit more grit and oomph, and that's what you think. You think, line them up on the start line at the start of every race. You think, this week, he's just got to, even if it results in an accident, he needs Lewis to know that he's not going to be moving out of the way, he's not going to be taken as an easy prisoner. And I don't think we've seen that yet from Valtteri. There we go. So I think Valtteri is a nice guy, yeah. Marc and Toto won't let him. Now that's an interesting point, Peter Van Breda. There is the other argument to this, that Mercedes don't really want him to upset Lewis. They don't really want him to destabilise their 6th time on the brink of being a 7-time world champion. If you're Mercedes and you're perhaps over the next 2 years about to have, there's only one driver in that team who could break every record in Formula 1 and become, according to the stats, the most successful driver in the history of the sport. Well, you want that to happen in a Mercedes. You don't want your other driver somehow getting in the way of that and making that record an impossibility before Lewis perhaps retires. So that is a very interesting point, in that perhaps Mercedes don't really want Valtteri to get in the way of Lewis. Yeah, Tony Roberts, he agrees. Hamilton had a failure in Malaysia 2016. Yes, absolutely, that's exactly. So that's why Nico did have a bit of luck on his side that year as well. And that's why I said also Valtteri needs a little bit of luck, because if you take the Silverstone race, the British Grand Prix, of course, they both had a tyre failure, but only cost one of them the race. And that was, of course, Valtteri. So yeah, you need luck, but you also need to make your own luck by getting those elbows out. There we go. I think that is a story that will be interesting. Perhaps he's just the perfect teammate for Lewis, in that he will not ever perhaps destabilise him. Perhaps he's the perfect teammate in the team for Mercedes as well. Perhaps they just have that perfect lineup right now. There's a very good argument to say that. However, with a car that's dominant in the sport, a car that is the best car by some margin, Valtteri needs to be right behind Lewis. He doesn't need to be third in the championship, and that, for that reason alone, he's got to get his act together. There we go. Let us pick up another question then, because we got a couple here. But whilst we're on the subject of Mercedes, we're going to talk about party mode. Now, here we go. Oh, sorry. Here we go. We are going to talk about party mode because it's the talking point of the weekend, isn't it? There was lots of talk now. A letter went out, or an email went out to the teams saying that this is going to happen. This is from the FIA. What we don't yet have is exact details of how this will work. Simon B says, why are the FIA banning party mode mid-season? It's not like this is a new thing that needs a quick ruling like DAS. Engine use restrictions already limit its usage, so this seems intended to be a performance leveller, which surely is inherently biased. Very good and valid point, Simon, absolutely right. Yes, it is being touted as a performance leveller, and we'll get on to what the expected result might be, but that's exactly why they're doing it. I mean, if we think back to the early days of Ferrari's domination back in the early 2000s, the FIA did very similar things, didn't they? They made rule changes to try and close up the field, or to peg back the dominance of whichever team was dominant at the time. Now, I come from a Formula 1 team background. I spent 10 years at Mclaren desperately trying to put everything in place to make sure we maximised everything we could to get the very best car, the best drivers, the best mechanics, the best engineers, designers, bringing together what we considered to be as close to the perfect team as we could to try and mount an assault on the World Championship, this holy grail of Formula 1. If I'm in that McLaren team right now and I'm dominating the sport, or we're dominating the sport, and the FIA come along with a rule change which is specifically designed to try and peg us back, you're going to be very upset. You're going to be very angry about that. And that, in a normal year, of course, the margins are so fine that those little details can really hamper you and peg you back considerably. As it happens this year, Mercedes are so dominant that I actually don't think this banning of party modes, if that's what you want to call it, is going to have a dramatic effect. And I'll explain why. But yes, Simon, you're right. It is inherently biased, but the FIA are trying to look at the bigger picture. So if I step away from my team role, Elvis the team mechanic, and step into a wider F1 fan role, you can kind of see why they're doing it. A lot of people are switching off. A lot of people are losing interest in the sport because it's so predictable. We know pretty much that the podium is going to be two Mercedes and a Red Bull. And if Valtteri does get his elbows out, we should know which order that's going to be in as well. So they're looking at the bigger picture here, what's good for Formula 1 and its longevity and keeping the interest. So I sort of understand that view too. Let's talk about why it won't do anything. Now, party mode is just simply the highest possible engine mode or power unit mode you can get. I've done a video on this, you can go and check it out, but it's basically turning everything up. So everything from the internal combustion engine, everything from the electrical side, the ERS, maximising everything you can get for that one lap or maybe 2 laps in qualifying. That's what it's for. You can't use it all the time because it would destroy the engine way before its dictated lifespan to do the 7 races or whatever it is over the course of a season. So you can use it in tiny bursts to get the maximum out of things, which is why that lap in qualifying is when we see it. Now, on one hand, I love to see cars at the absolute limit in qualifying. I love to see them as quick as they can be, breaking lap records, drivers hanging on at the ragged edge. So I love that side of things. Taking away these party modes essentially takes that tool away from everybody. The difference is that some teams have a much more effective power party mode, if you like, than others. Mercedes have managed to perfect a very significant step between their much more normal modes and this high power mode. So you see a huge chunk of time gained as they flick it into that high power mode. Perhaps other teams, perhaps a Ferrari, perhaps the Honda, perhaps it doesn't have as much of a step. It still has a party mode, and anyone that tells you they don't have a party mode is lying. They may not call it party mode, but they turn the engine up to the max, and maybe just that's a little bit on some teams. So that's the difference. If we ban it, if we say, and this is the bit we don't yet know how exactly the technical directive is going to be worded, we're expecting it over the next couple of days, it's likely to say, to use the Parc Fermé regulations and say, right, whichever mode your power unit is set in qualifying, it's locked in place. And that's easy to do. You can lock the software down. Obviously very easy to see if there's been a software change over the course of qualifying. So it's easy to police. So we lock it in. You can even actually physically lock the software in using the FIA data logger. So we can do that. So we can lock the software in, lock it into whichever mode for qualifying, and then we say you've got to use that all the way through, either all the way through the race, or for a percentage of the race you have to be in that mode. So that's probably how they're going to do it. So all you do is you take the lifespan of your power unit, all right, which is what they do now. They say 7 races, for example. We can afford to be in the highest power modes for, let's say, over those 7 races, I don't know, 10 laps, let's say, probably 15 laps, something like that. So they account for that amount of damage, which is how they refer to it. When you're in the maximum power modes, it causes a level of damage, which would be unsustainable if you left it in that mode for a long period of time. But it is sustainable if you just do it in short bursts, because every time you run an engine, it causes damage, just tiny amounts. And that's why by the time you get to the end of the 7 races, it's completely damaged and you can't use it anymore. So now all you do is you spread that power level out over your 7 races. If you've got to be in the same continuous power mode, you just level out the damage requirements over 7 races. So effectively you get a little bit more power from everything over the entire range of the engine. So, sorry, I've waffled on here for ages. I'll come to your comments in a moment. It doesn't stop. It doesn't level performance. It may stop that massive boost that Mercedes have in qualifying, but the truth is their car is already so much quicker. Even before they go into any party mode, they're probably 6-7 tenths of a lap quicker than anybody just anyway. And then if they crank it up, maybe they can make that up to a second a lap. In fact, there's no benefit to Mercedes being 1 second a lap quicker in qualifying. And actually, if they're 2 tenths quicker, and yet can save a bit of that engine damage to spread out over the race, it's better for Mercedes. So this is a rule that's perhaps a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to the dominance of Mercedes, but I promise you this is not going to work. It's not going to have the effect that they say or they hope it's going to have. I can almost guarantee it. I've gone on for ages, so let's see what you guys are saying. Let me see. Oh, your comments have frozen on my page. Let me go to this one, hold on. Okay, so you're saying it makes the sport, if it makes the sport closer, it's not a bad thing. I don't think it will make the sport closer. I honestly don't. Certainly not at the front end. And the other problem with all this is you're hampering the other Mercedes teams that are really actually benefiting in Q2, like Williams making it into Q2 with George Russell. At least a big part of that is because of party mode. You take that away from him, you probably push him back towards the rear end. The Racing Points can use that to their benefit to get closer to that front end. I mean, look how close they were over the course of the weekend. So it's not just Mercedes you're going to peg back in this. They've got such an advantage anyway. They'll still be in the front. They'll just be maybe not a second down the road in front. They'll just be a little bit closer. So that's my theory. I don't think it's going to close the field up. Let me see, it's a shame because qualifying should be all about seeing the absolute max the car can do. I'll miss that element, says Luke Clayson. Yeah, and I agree with you on that one, Luke. I mean, the one thing I would say is, even if you turn party mode down or off or whatever, you'll still see cars at the limit. You'll still see drivers pushing the car to the limit that they can. It just may not be breaking lap records to the same extent. So we'll still see cars on the limit. It just won't be perhaps quite as impressive, but I think it'll be negligible in what you'll notice. Let's see, we've got cheating engine modes need to be banned, says Can Cracker. Well, yes, but this isn't cheating. This is perfectly within the rules. No one's cheating in terms of their party mode. It's just how they choose to use the lifespan of their engine. That's all it is. Toto reckons it will give them a better race pace, says BMW 330D. Well, it will, for exactly the reason I've just said, because they can use a bit more of that damage that they're allowed to use up over the lifetime of the engine. They can use it during the race. So effectively, they'll have more power for longer in a race, even though only a tiny amount, and just less spike of high power in the qualifying part of Saturday. How will this affect overtaking during the race, says Philip Gonzalez? Well, that is the other part. So party mode, as it's been termed, which is always about qualifying, is very similar really to overtake modes and the scenario 7s and these kind of things. They all have different words for it, but essentially they're just turning different elements of the power unit up and down as and when they need them. So for overtake, maybe they deploy everything from the battery when they've got one shot at getting an overtake. It depends how the technical directive is worded as to whether you can change the deployment of things like the ERS. Maybe it'll just be effective on the internal combustion engine side. We don't yet know, and that's the problem. The teams don't even yet know. As I say, we're waiting for that technical directive any time now. Did I just see a message from my kids there saying, I'm sure I just saw a message from my own kids saying, you smell. Yes, I did. Cheeky. Hi Dad, you smell, love Rex and Ginger. Right, thanks very much guys. Now get to bed. Right, let's move on from this one. Cheeky little oiks. Okay, let's move on from that one. In fact, let's just quickly, I'll show you this because I can't remember what I was going to show you this for. This is the Mercedes steering wheel, and all I was going to say, I was going to point out, was that the party mode is essentially a switch position. So it'll be things like, see the big switches at the bottom, 10, 11, 12, those big rotary switches. All they do is they change the settings from the power unit. Some will change internal combustion engine settings, others will change ERS, others will give you everything. And all it is a switch position. Now, all that switch position is doing, of course, is changing some software in the ECU. So they can easily do that and change that software to a level that runs the same without being accessible or without being changeable on these switches when it comes to Saturday. And the other thing I thought I'd do whilst I've got this picture up, because it's often quite interesting to have a look through a steering wheel, is just run you through, in case you don't know, what some of these things do, because it's always really interesting to see a close-up picture. If you look at number 1 over on the left-hand side there, where it says entry, that is the red rotary switch there, that is a diff entry. So that's changing what the diff does on the way into a corner. You can have that preset to a number. So that will change the way that the diff locking operates on the way into a corner. So you can change that. Over on the other side, you'll see number 7, the opposite side of the steering wheel, high speed, that will also be a diff setting for the high speed corners. Again, just changing the way the diff locking works and how freely the rear axle is able to spin as it goes round independently of each other as it goes round a corner. Let's go on across the top here. Number 9 is DRS button, the yellow one. Number 3, so the +10 and the +1, those are for flicking through modes in the dash setup. Not really something you'd very often use out on the circuit, but if you want to flick through the pages of your screen, you can go through that. Somebody might say, we're going to go to purple switch position 11 and I need you to go to +31. Now that sounds like a horrendously complicated thing, but you turn the purple rotary switch to number 11 and then you press 3 times on the +10 button and then once on the +1 button, and it would tell you what you're doing on the screen. Again, something highly unlikely you'd ever do out on the racetrack, but maybe in the garage the engineer might just say, right, can you go to purple switch 11 +31. Quite a common thing just in terms of the setup of what's going on in your wheel. Number 4 is the neutral button. Number 5, pit lane speed limit. Number 6, PC, that is pit confirm. So when the team come on the radio and say, right, we want you to box this lap, without having to open up the radio channel and talk back again because you might be concentrating. There's that button right there on your right thumb. Just press the PC button and that will let the pit wall know that you've understood the message to box. That's that one. The gold rotary switches on the side there, they are brake balance. So that's moving brake balance forward and rear, brake migration as well. As the brakes wear over the course of a race, you can just make finite adjustments to that. Equally on the buttons number 14 and 8, that is brake balance plus and rear. So that's a quick adjustment. A push of that button will be a percentage maybe, or 2% of moving the brake balance forward or rear. So that's something you might just do quickly on the way into a corner if you need a bit more rear braking rather than, or take it away from the front, that kind of thing. The torque button there, obviously, torque on the radio. What's that one there? What does that say? I can't read it. Does that say RS? I can't see it on my screen. Race start, that is to go into race start mode. The Marc button, number 13, that's an interesting one. So when you're going around, particularly in practice sessions, you can press that Marc button just to put a marker in the data. So without having to worry too much, you might have noticed that, you know, perhaps you had a little bit too much diff locking at turn 13 on the entry. And without having to worry about exactly remembering which corner it was, whether it was entry or exit, you know, you might have a 10 lap run ahead of you, you can just press that mark. And then as you go back through the data later, the engineer will come to you and go, you put a marker in the data at the entry to turn 13, and the driver will go, oh yeah, it's because I need a little bit less diff locking or whatever it might be. So that's that one. The red X, I've got no idea what that one is, I'm afraid. And the rotary switches on the thumb position there, just on the inside of the wheel, well, they can be set up for anything. I don't know what Mercedes have those set up for, but essentially they can be, this whole thing can be configured to do whatever it is you want to do. So there you go. That's the steering wheel. I hope that's interesting. There we go. Reverse. Yeah, there is a reverse button. Actually not sure where it is on that one. Maybe could be on the back. Don't know. Not sure on the Mercedes, but yes, there definitely is a reverse button somewhere. Where do the flag lights appear? So the flag lights appear along the top here, and those, can you see right at the top of the screen? There is a series of LEDs and there's 3 down either side, just inside the pit lane speed limit button and inside the neutral button. Those little dots are all LEDs and they will light up. And again, you can configure those to be however you want. Along the top, it's clearly the shift lights, but you can also program some of those to be the blue flags, yellow flags, that kind of thing. So the driver always gets notification of that kind of thing too. Drinks button, yeah, good point. Not sure where it is on that one, but again, it could be that they set up something like that red X button to be a drinks button. It's not always that a driver uses the drinks button. They don't use it at every race, and not every driver uses it. So you can actually configure those to be whatever you want to be. So yes, it will have a drinks button. Is the red X the hot water drink button? Yeah, could well be, yeah. By the time we used to put drinks bottles in behind the driver's seat, we'd pack them with dry ice going to the grid on a hot race. You know that by the time they've done their formation lap and are lining up on the grid, it's already like a cup of tea, which must be horrible. Well, there we go. Okay, let's move on. Sorry, I went right off piste on that one. But let's take a look at what we've got here, because I want to talk about Charles Leclerc and his belts. Let's talk about this one for a moment. Charles Leclerc, let's see, W. Ryan here, let's read the question. He says, hi Mark, long-time fan and follower. These live sessions are brilliant. Thank you very much, appreciate that. Do you think it's odd that there wasn't even a mention by the stewards of Leclerc driving 2 laps without his seatbelt? That seems one of the most serious safety breaches of recent years. It absolutely does, WM Ryan. I couldn't agree with you more. It feels like a really serious breach, and I'm very surprised that the stewards didn't look into that at the very least, and it wasn't reported by race control, because it's not even a secret. He even talked about it over the radio, which race control are listening to. I mean, we even heard it on the TV. I'm amazed, to be honest. I think that was a really irresponsible thing to do from Charles, and ultimately it's his responsibility. He knew that he'd taken that seatbelt buckle off. And I also want to show you what happened in the course of that whole process. I've got the radio transmission here, translated into text from racefans.net. Seen this clip doing the rounds actually now on social media because F1 posted it, the onboard footage and then the radio. A couple of things came from that. I was really amazed, let's come back to that in a second, I was really amazed at that interaction between Ferrari and Charles Leclerc, because Charles's engineer to me seemed so unconvincing in the way that he talked to Charles. It was almost like he just wasn't sure or wasn't confident of anything he was saying. I mean, that's the opposite of what a race engineer needs to be. You need to be, even if you don't know the answer to a question, you need to be affirmative, you need to be confident, you need to instill confidence in your driver, and yet it felt so wishy-washy when Charles was saying, look, I want a box, and then he said, I've got, the belts have come undone, and that's where we'll bring this bit in. And the engineer was coming on going, yeah, do you need some help with your belts? I mean, of course he needs help with his belts. No driver can ever do his own seat belts up. That never happens. So yes, he needed assistance. So here we go. Look, if we scroll down to the bit after he's gone, begins new lap. Guys, we need to box. We need to box. When I went for the button to switch the car on again, my seat belts are off now. So when I brake, I'm moving quite a bit. I don't mind, but I'm pretty sure nobody will be happy with me driving without seat belts. Absolutely right, they won't be happy. I mean, I'm staggered that he was even happy enough to drive around without seat belts. Not only is that clearly incredibly dangerous if he were to have an accident, but he also goes on to say, a couple of rows down, he says, prepare the attached. This is Charles to his engineer, prepare the attached. I don't know where it is in the car. Now what he means there is the belt buckle, the attachment. The belt buckle is a standalone piece that then the two belts clip into, and when he'd undone that, and this is normal, that belt buckle can just come off. It comes off in your hand, so if you're getting out the car quite often, you take that off, it comes off the belts, you take it out the car and out you climb. He's saying that when he flicked that to undo it, the belt buckle came off and he doesn't know where it's gone. Now that is a big chunk. That's a big chunk of metal that those belts all plug into, and that's now floating around in his cockpit. He's got no idea where it's gone. That in itself, to me, is a massive worry, and yet he was asking, look, can we have another one? Can you get another one? Because I don't know where the other one's gone. Well, it could be under your brake pedal, mate. So that was a strange one. But then he comes on and he says, right, box, we'll try and fix it. Charles has told them to get a new attachment ready. Let me know if you need help with the seat belt, says his engineer. We'll try to fix it. Charles says, well, for sure I need help. It's as if I was getting into the car. Of course I need help. Okay, copy, we'll fix it. And we'll try to fix the seat belts. Okay, I told you to prepare another attachment. We need another attachment. I don't have the attachment, it flew off. I mean, to me, that whole conversation, there are so many things wrong with it. First of all, as I say, I was really shocked at the way the Ferrari pit wall was talking to Charles, because in my experience, the race engineer and the way he talks to a driver is crucial in instilling confidence in that driver. And I've even known race engineers who are the normal person to talk to the driver, perhaps not being right, or not having the right tone of voice, or not feeling confident enough to be on the radio. We've had to put someone else in the role of doing the talking bit, even though he's not the race engineer, because that's so important, that voice you hear. Anyway, that surprised me. And then the whole thing of driving without belts, well, my mind's blown. I really don't understand how anyone could be a Ferrari fan. Well, I mean, look, Ferrari have millions of fans, rightly so. They're a huge team, massive success, massive history in the sport. They are important, and I'm sure they will come good again. They're going through a horrific time right now, though. So many things seem wrong. That's a total disaster, says Phantom Tetra. It sure is. Was Charles irresponsible? Because that attachment could go... Yes, Charles was totally irresponsible on a couple of levels. He should not, once he's undone his belts... And this is the other point, if you haven't seen this clip, he didn't bear in mind where he spun was right at the pit entry. When he got the car going again, he could have easily gone straight into the pit lane. He didn't, he went round and did another lap. Not only that, he went round and did another lap past the pits. So 2 flying laps before then coming into the pit lane, that's with no seatbelts. Amazing. There we go. Let me see, it was after the car shut down. Yes, it was after, so essentially the car shut down either he thought that it was game over and he was getting ready to get out, or I think by reading that radio transmission, it sounds like he might have even knocked it when trying to flick the switch back on, and that's what undid his belts. But either way, he drove for 2 flying laps at full speed with no seatbelts on. Was Vettel's engineer wasn't any better? No, this is a problem at Ferrari. One of the things I took, and you may have seen this, as I say, the clip that F1 posted today, was that every time Charles asked a question, the race engineer was hesitant, he was unsure, he said, okay, I'll get back to you. Sometimes he did get back to him, sometimes he didn't, because Charles had to come on again. It's the last thing you need, and that says to me, it sort of hints to me at somebody on that Ferrari pit wall who is terrified to make a decision. And perhaps that is a little bit representative of Ferrari, because that's how it's felt for some time, hasn't it? They're all terrified of making the wrong call, so sometimes they just don't make one. There we go. He thought his car wouldn't start, so undid his belts before trying again, and it worked, says Josh Smith. Yeah, I think that is what happened. Yeah, exactly. He was about to get out. The team said, right, give it one more go. He did give it one more go, and it actually started. But he was opposite the pit lane. He could have come and should have come straight in. That's my point. So I'm very surprised, to answer the original question there, I'm amazed that wasn't reported to the stewards. It wasn't picked up on. And, you know, I actually wonder now whether something might still happen, whether he could be reprimanded or have some kind of punishment applied to him retrospectively, because there's evidence there, it's a slam dunk, and it feels like a very serious breach. We talk about all the safety in Formula 1, that's a very serious breach for me. It doesn't just endanger him, it endangers a lot of other people as well, potentially. There we go. Let's get on to another question, because as I say, we've got so many. And, well, in fact, look, there's this one here, also on the subject of Ferrari. In your opinion, what's going on between Ferrari and Seb? It was embarrassing at Spain, almost like, right, Charles out, we might as well pack up and, oh, wait, Vettel's still on track. That's quite well put, Deb. I think that is kind of what it felt like. It did feel like an afterthought. I mean, I thought Seb drove very well considering what he had to deal with in terms of his race strategy, and again, Ferrari being a bit wishy-washy and hesitant to make an absolute decision. And at that point, they only had one car to deal with, and still they couldn't be decisive. And that just hints to me that, you know, like I say, people are terrified of the repercussions of getting something wrong at Ferrari, whether that's because they feel like they're going to lose their job, because they feel the media is going to come down hard on them, the Italian media will slay them for it. That's often been a thing at Ferrari. And I mean, that's a discussion we could have on for an hour in itself, is what Ferrari need to do. But surely when we talk about the culture at Ferrari, they need to be looking at places like Mercedes, places like McLaren, where this culture, and McLaren I talk about only in recent times, they've rebuilt McLaren, and they've also, along with that, rebuilt the culture. They're trusting people in certain positions, same as Mercedes, to make calls because they know they've got the right person in the job, the most experienced person, the person who is the right man for that job, or woman for that job. It's about having those people and then trusting them to do what they need to do, rather than them feel so terrified that someone's looking over their shoulder, they just won't make a call. Should Ferrari give up until 2022, Bradley Austin? There's lots of reasons they should. They won't. They need to compete next year. But the truth is, yeah, I mean, actually, we joke about it. In real terms, they cannot transform the car they have now into something that's going to be competitive in 2021 because of the freeze in technical rules. So they do need to shift their focus onto 2022. They can't give up and walk away. They need to fulfill their contractual obligations and everything else. But having said that, they haven't signed the Concord Agreement yet. But yes, they do need to start making sure that when they hit the ground in 2022, they have shaken off everything that's going wrong, and they hit the ground running and are the best Ferrari that they can be. That's going to take some work though behind the scenes. Right, let's pick up another one here, because this is quite interesting. Stephen Cole says, what do you think of Checo asking about the status of his tyres? Shouldn't he be telling the engineers? I don't like that they're allowed to give this kind of info to drivers, or e.g. directing them to use the overtake button like Lando. Still, it takes the skill away from me. That's a good point and a good discussion point, and I'd love to know what you guys think on this. So You get typing away and I'll tell you what I think. I kind of agree with you. Now, in the incidents that we're talking about here, Checo asked his engineer what the state of the tyres was. He was asking about the tyre temperatures, and the engineer then came back to him and said something along the lines of, I think he said, we're okay, but we're at the upper limit of surface temperature on the rear, or something like that. Some drivers have that information on their own dash display. It's very easy to do. It's just a data point. You can choose what's on your display, on your dash display on the steering wheel. Some drivers like to have that information all the time in front of them so they can constantly refer to it if they need to. Others perhaps like to have some what they consider more important information and get the details from the engineers. So in answer to your question, Stephen, I agree with you. I do think that's over-engineering a situation, but it's very easy to fix and it's just a personal choice. So whether he looks at the information on his own dash or whether he asks the engineer, it's the same thing. Perhaps the question should be, should we even be getting those temps? Should they be monitored? Should we just be telling the driver, go out and feel if your tyres are overheated and then deal with it? Perhaps that's the way that we should be going. I mean, it's a difficult one for me because I'm, you know, from the engineering side of Formula One, I'm all about this technical innovation and these technical details. I love this stuff. But equally from a fan perspective, do we want to see drivers on the edge using their skill unaided by the pit wall? Let's discuss. That's exactly why I like the removal of engine modes, because it brings back driver skill. Well, that's Rob Lau. I don't think it does, to be honest. I don't think it does, Rob. It's not, engine modes isn't some, it's not a driver aid. It literally gives you more power, and you've still got to drive the car in the same way. So whether you level that engine mode out across the race or spike it in qualifying, that's not quite the same thing. So, you know, that's another discussion. Engine modes is a discussion, I guess we've already had it, but let me know what you think about the engineers over-engineering the car, or should it be more driver-focused? I love the conversation between Lando and his engineer in the two Austrian GPs. Yeah, I mean, those conversations, the whole Scenario 7 conversation was brilliant for me because it showed some real human side, the emotion between pit wall and driver, saying, you know, use overtake button for 5 seconds out of turn 7. I mean, it's really fascinating to get that insight, but should we be doing that? Should we be just saying, look, here's all your toys, you go and use them as a driver, you go and use them to the best of your ability, and let's see, given what we're providing you with, this car, with these modes, these toys, these buttons, what can you go and do with it? And let's give all the other drivers the same and say, look, you go and do what you can do with it too. So that's also an interesting side of things. You say that, Mark, but look at the tyres from Silverstone. Information is needed. Well, we had all that information and we still had tyres blowing up. So they didn't use the information, did they? Because whether you're a team or a driver, you will still push those tyres or that car to the limit. If you think a one-stop strategy is your fastest way around the lights to flag, you will push it, but it's marginal. You'll push it to the limit. That's what you have to do. So whether that's a driver pushing it to the limit and feeling when his tyres are on the edge and it's time to come in and make a change, or the engineer telling them that he feels like it's on the edge, for me that's the same thing. I mean, Silverstone is not a good example because we had tyres blowing up even though we got all this information. Ban all pit-to-car radio except for pit stops and safety issues, and let the driver drive the car. Jackie Twix. Discuss that one. Ban all driver radio. I'm not with you on that one because that's an extreme take on it, and I do understand why you're saying it, because it is just driver and machine out on the racetrack competing against each other, but this is a team sport. And I do like that whole, the pit radio channels for me are perhaps the most interesting ways to watch a Grand Prix, because the human interaction is often quite fascinating. You get to hear some emotion on the radio, both from the team at the pit wall and from the driver's side. So I don't want to see radios banned. Perhaps we need to look at what information we can gather, we can harvest, and how we can use that. Whether we can all send it back to our factories on the other side of the world and get that churned through simulations and then back to the race. You know, those kind of discussions I guess we could start looking more into. F1's a team sport. I don't understand the arguments banning any team and drive engineer talk, says David Hartong. Yes, I agree with you there, David. I'm with you on that one. Driver radio adds a lot of insight to the race. Yeah, agree with you there. They tried to ban radio. They did try to ban radio a few years ago. It didn't work. Yeah, that was a really weird, that was one of those horrendous knee-jerk reactions, wasn't it, in terms of rule changes, where they banned radio that was sort of classed as helping a driver. Very strange, a little bit like that Haas debacle on the way to the grid, where you're not allowed to talk to your driver about giving you any information about the race start. It's a bizarre thing. If you're just flicking through the channels as a casual fan, you stumble across Formula One and you hear that someone's been given a penalty because he was told to box on his formation lap, you'd be thinking, what on earth am I watching here? So it's a difficult one to balance, isn't it? Right, let's move on. Yeah, didn't they ban it before? They did try and ban it before. It turned out to be an absolute farce. It did, says Sakala Puka. Agree with you. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Mario Positano on the Barcelona track. Hey Mark, if you were going to redesign the Spanish track, how could you increase passing? Same with Imola. Love your videos. Thank you very much, Mario. Appreciate that. Right, well, let's have a look at the Barcelona track. Here it is. That is what we're looking at. Now, every year we go there, we have pretty dull races. So why is it? That we struggle to overtake around here is that the biggest opportunities clearly are down into turn 1. So as we go into that red sector, the first sector, turn 1, the right-hander, that's at the end of a long straight. So decent braking zone, but it's not that much of a braking zone. First of all, we're braking very, very late into turn 1 because it's actually a really fast section of corners that comes after it. So the braking zone is probably only, I mean, I don't know, but I've been doing some laps on the simulator here. You're braking not far off 50 metres, probably 60 or 70 metres. That's not much of a braking zone and doesn't give you much scope to get alongside and affect an overtake. If you had a braking zone that was over 100 metres, you've got more of a chance, but that needs a much slower corner coming out of it. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that and someone said to me, well, why isn't DRS so effective around here? Well, the last sector, the yellow sector of the lap there, from turn 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, that's a really slow section of the lap, very difficult to follow. And then you come out of the chicane at 14 and 15, come into turn 16, which is the long right-hander, relatively fast because you're building up speed, you're flat out through there, but it's a long radius corner. Now we know what happens with Formula One cars as you come through long radius corners, long duration corners. You just can't follow the car in front. You have to sit back by 4 or 5 seconds to not be massively affected by the dirty turbulent air coming off the car that you're chasing. So if you've got to hang back or you lose all your downforce through that long right-hander of 16 and drop back, by the time you get onto this start-finish straight, you've actually lost quite a lot of distance. And yes, you may get DRS, but by the time DRS is effective enough to catch up, unless you've got a massive speed differential over the car in front to get down to turn 1, it's not effective enough. So it is a circuit configuration problem. And I mean, if we look at it again, what would I do to change it? You'd have to start looking at changing turn 1, which is a real shame because that's a brilliant sequence of corners. But if you want to affect a better overtaking opportunity there, you need a much bigger braking zone. So you've either got to tighten that up or tighten up what comes after it. So the cars have to come from massive speed down to a much slower speed, gives the opportunity for a lunge, or you change the way you come onto this start-finish straight, where you don't necessarily have to follow through this really long, high speed, long duration corner where cars struggle so much to follow that by the time they get onto the straight, they're not close enough to affect that overtake, even with DRS. So very difficult. It's a great circuit, Barcelona, on so many levels. You know, for a qualifying lap, it's brilliant to drive it yourself. I mean, I did a preview video this week, which never made it to air because I had some problems with the buffering on the high-speed lap. It just wouldn't upload it. Anyway, that's another story. But driving it on your own on the sim is a really enjoyable lap. It's great fun. So there's lots of good stuff about this track, but overtaking is never going to be easy. And there aren't really any other places. Into turn 10, possibly, because that is a very slow corner, left-hander there. Let me bring that up. Coming down from turn 9, from the sector 2 into sector 3. It's a DRS zone, but it's a short straight. So again, you've got that same problem coming through a really high-speed turn 9. Long radius, long duration corner, onto a really fast straight. You're flat out. all the way from back at turn 7. So there's very little opportunity to actually get close enough before you get onto this short DRS straight to use the braking zone of 10 to get by. So it's got so many problems in terms of overtaking. So that is a big shame. So there are changes you could make, but it would affect some of the other things that are really quite good about it. Imola, well, I haven't got a map of Imola up, so I can't talk about that one, but that also is a very tough circuit to overtake on. But again, similarly, a brilliant circuit to drive. So they are challenges, and actually the challenges are more about the Formula 1 cars, which we're trying to address in 22, rather than the circuit. John Boutel says make the track wider. I mean, you can obviously do that, but you still have the same problems I've just talked about. It might make it easier though. Widening certain turns on the track may help. Yeah, you can of course make the track wider, and there are definitely some circuits which are too narrow. Imola perhaps is definitely one of those, but you still have the same troubles that I've just mentioned. Barcelona is a test track, not a race track, says Neil Roberts. It's a great test track, but perhaps you're right. Time trial, yeah, it would make a great time trial. It's a great qualifying circuit, as I say. Okay, what do you think about a 2-day weekend in Imola? Alex Costas. Let's talk about that. First of all, let me just say I love it. I think it's great. The reasons I think it's great are that we are going to get minimal preparation before we go into that race. And given that it's a race we haven't raced on recently, that has even more of an impact. I heard Max Verstappen saying he didn't like it for that reason, that we should be doing that at somewhere like Silverstone where we had back-to-backs, not at a brand new circuit. But for me, that's the reason we should be doing it there. What it stops is that obviously the hours and hours of running around on Friday, but even more crucially for me, it stops on Friday night. The overnight running of simulators off the back of those hours and hours of laps on a Friday, which is where teams fine-tune everything. So the information on a Friday goes back to base, back to the factory, where a sim driver is in the sim at the factory, running laps after laps after laps all night long, doing a night shift, putting all of that information through various sims, which then spits out the perfect setup on a Saturday morning for the teams to go and run into qualifying in the race. We won't be able to do that. There simply won't be time. We'll have an hour and a half on Saturday morning and then get on with it, boys. And I love it. What do you think of that? Imola's going to be carnage, says WM Ryan. It could be carnage, in a good way, I hope. Let me see, introduce rain, says Varun Sambi. Always spices things up, doesn't it? Imola, let me see, all these new tracks going to be crazy, says Redmond Barry. I do think we've got a brilliant set of circuits. You know, what this COVID situation has done for us is shaken up the calendar. And, you know, whilst you might say you don't want Imola on the calendar for the next 10 years because it could develop into a boring Grand Prix, it's great to throw it in as a random for this year and just see what happens. I think it's brilliant, particularly with the 2-day weekend. I'm really looking forward to it, so that's great. Imola might be boring. Well, it might be boring, but for the reasons I've just said, doing away with Friday practice, it might not be. We might see some surprises being sprung. Of course, it's always going to favour the big teams. They're always going to be better prepared than anybody else, but that's the same in every single thing we do. Do you think the circuit de Catalunya should be removed as the team got so many data from previous season testing? I think if you're going to say it could be removed, and actually it was this close to being removed, wasn't it? It's not necessarily because they've got so many years of previous data, but for the reasons I've just talked about, the layout and the race that it produces. You know, we got Monaco, always an incredibly dull race. But perhaps on that event, qualifying is the star of that weekend. Qualifying is perhaps the most exciting bit, and it is exciting to see qualifying around Monaco. So I think it's nice to have a mix of weekends where, you know, you get a little bit of something different for a certain Grand Prix. I don't want them all to be the same, that all just, you know, the perfect circuit or the Tilke circuit or whatever. I like this mix of stuff, and it's nice this year we're getting a whole range of them. Everyone's going to need their party modes at Imola for that long straight. Well, yeah, they may not have any party modes left by then. We'll see. Put Portimao on full time, Clansome. That is the Algarve circuit in Portugal, which I think is going to be brilliant. As I said to you guys before, I've driven it myself. It's a brilliant, brilliant circuit. I think it's going to be great for Formula One cars. Can't wait for that. But this is a test year, isn't it? We're testing out some new venues. It's going to be really interesting. All right, 10 minutes to go. Let's pick up another question. As I say, I've got loads. Less about the weekend just gone, but this one, Manimal says, what are the top root causes for car vibrations? Which kind of wear does it lead to in a race, and is it the result of a bad race trim or a bad car design? So car vibrations are almost always to do with tyres. Bear in mind they have a huge amount of mass. The wheel and tyre is a heavy thing. It's rotating at massive speed, and any imbalance in any of those tyres, even just one of them, let alone all four, causes at that speed a huge vibration which travels through the suspension, through the chassis. Don't forget, Formula One cars, incredibly stiff. Vibrations make their way through the whole thing very quickly. And those vibrations or those imbalances in the tyres can come from a number of things. There's the most basic one, just like your road car. Formula One tyres or rims have wheel weights on them. It's exactly the same as you do on your road car. They're not clipped on like your road car, they're stuck on, which some of you I'm sure will have. If you've got a nice set of rims, you've got stick-on wheel weights, exactly the same. So they have to be balanced in exactly the same way. And occasionally, very occasionally, it's very rare, those wheel weights can unstick themselves and come off. And if that happens, you'd be amazed at the vibration you get from one tyre or one rim being out of balance. So that can happen, it's quite rare, but the most common thing, of course, like we saw in Silverstone, is where you get some blistering or you get some massive pickup on a tyre. The blistering, of course, sends the wheel or the rim, the tyre out of round. It puts an eruption in the surface of the tyre, and you can imagine at the speed that's going, that also sends huge vibrations through the car. So the vibrations are not a consequence necessarily of a bad car design or anything like that. It's more about how you've treated or used your tyres. If you had a massive lockup and flat spotted a tyre, of course that gives you massive vibrations. If you've overused them and blistered them, massive vibrations. A wheel weight coming off, as I said, all sorts of things like that. But those are the most common. It's always to do with tyres and rims, because they're the things that this rotating mass is so significant at the speeds they're going. I thought F1 would have engineered better wheel weights by now. Well, the truth is that these wheel weights, I was going to say they're light, but they're a weight. So they don't need them to be light, they want them to be heavy, they want them to be the right weight. And actually sticking them on is by far the best way. When I say they come off, it's incredibly rare that they come off, but they can. A bit of wheel banging or just being a bit unlucky because they are stuck on can come off, but it's very rare. So they actually work very well. There's not really any need to engineer anything different because it works. Can the F1 engines survive a race in Bahrain Oval where they'll go mostly flat out, says Alex Costas. Good question. So that was talk about the perimeter circuit in Bahrain being used, wasn't there? Which is almost like an oval, and for a large part of it will be flat. Well, that is something that the F1 engine manufacturers will have to factor in. And this is one of the things that is a bit of an unknown right now. We don't know how many races this season is going to make up. So as we get towards the tail end of it, I mean, we'll know by then, but at the moment we don't know. So the last engine coming into the pool for every driver, we don't yet know what that has to do. Does it have to do 7 races? Does it have to do 3 races? Does it have, which races is it going to be? We don't even know that yet. So once they get that information, they'll plan a usage strategy for that final power unit, how much it can be used at one particular event, how much it needs to be held back for somewhere like that Bahrain oval type circuit, if indeed that's what we end up doing. So they will have to plan for it, that is for sure, because it will take a huge toll on a power unit. That much time at full throttle, when I talk about engine damage, that's exactly what you'll be talking about. So when you set your engine mode for that particular weekend, the whole thing would probably have to be a bit lower than it would be for somewhere like Barcelona. What we've got, 5 minutes. Right, let's see what you're saying. What's the engine allocation? So the engine allocation at the moment is as normal until we know what the end state of the calendar is. And they've already set out, in fact it's in the regulations, if we get, I can't remember off the top of my head, but if we get sort of less than 13 races, you drop a power unit. If it's 13 to 15, you get one more, or something along those lines. So at the moment, we're banking on the fact that, of course, the first power unit we know is definitely going to do, you know, its full lifespan. The second one looks like it'll do the same, and then the third one we don't yet know. So teams are all waiting for that information, because it is quite crucial as to how you use your power unit. If the last engine in the pool only has to do 3 races, you're going to use it very differently, of course, to the ones, you know, to one that might have to do 7 races. So that's an interesting point. Quick one on Albon. Is he safe for the season? Alan Stewart. Is Albon safe for the season? Under normal circumstances, I would have said not. But this year, I'm not sure. I think he looks like he's getting huge backing from Christian Horner. They are still right behind him. I mean, I think he will see out the season. Partly because, who else are they going to put in? Probably Gasly, who's on fire right now. But he was on fire, which got him that promotion to Red Bull in the first place. Perhaps Red Bull, and I've said this before, need to start looking at Red Bull. Perhaps not looking at their drivers, because they've had a series of drivers now come through, all incredibly talented. They step into that Red Bull team environment and they underperform for various reasons. And 2 of them now have dropped back to what was Toro Rosso, now AlphaTauri, and have stepped it up again. What does that tell you about the environment, perhaps, and the effect that might be having on a driver? So I think Albon will stick it out for the season. You know, he obviously needs to get his head in the right space, and the team need to find a solution for him. But this is a Red Bull problem, not necessarily just an Alex Albon problem in my mind. Adam Elliott, Gasly's better off at AlphaTauri. I think you're right, he is, and he's more comfortable in that environment, exactly the same as Danny Kvyat, and perhaps it would be the same for Alex Albon, but you know, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Red Bull now need to find a solution that's going to help him come good. Last couple of minutes then. Do you think McLaren are favouring Lando because Sainz is leaving, says BB? No, I don't think that at all. I think McLaren will want the strongest results for their team, and if that happens to come from Carlos or whether it comes from Lando, they won't mind. There's no bad blood between them. You know, this is going to set the team up, both financially, of course, because your finishing position this year determines the prize money that that comes into you in the future. So they need both drivers up there. They will be holding back information about future developments, and that's normal. So Carlos won't be invited into areas of the factory to see what's coming next year and the year after, and developments that might be coming to the car. The Mercedes power unit introduction, Carlos won't be part of those conversations, but that won't hamper him necessarily over a race weekend. So I think they'll be giving equal treatment to both drivers. This is what they've always done, and I think they'll continue to do that. Last one. What's your podium prediction for Spa, Josh Smith? It's got to be the 2 Mercedes. I mean, this is a power circuit. It's an aero circuit. It's going to be Lewis. It should be Valtteri, and then it'll be Max. What's yours? Let's have some of those in as I wrap this up. Let's get your Spa predictions rolling in. 1, 2, 3s. I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because it's not a difficult one. It should be an easy one because we've got such a gulf. What will be much, much harder is to predict P4, P5, P6. Because that battle, and beyond that, is actually really fascinating right now. If you remove Mercedes from Formula 1 right now, it's quite fascinating, it's quite interesting. And there's another subject we need to get into another time. We haven't got time now, but the whole Mercedes involvement in the Racing Point saga. There are rumours bubbling around that could go on and on and on. That could be more involvement than we perhaps originally thought. The whole Toto and his future of Mercedes, that's another subject we didn't get onto. I'm really sorry, that would have been a great one to talk about. We need to do this again. But anyway, listen, thank you so much everybody for all of your input today. I really, really appreciate it. It's been fascinating as ever. So much to talk about, even though the race was quite dull. But I appreciate you all taking the time to hang out here for the afternoon, doing the live chat before we even came on air. That's a brilliant thing that I'm loving. And I appreciate all your input into the show tonight as well. That's been great. So thank you. I will be back over the course of this week with more nonsense, and we'll be back very soon. I won't be here next week for a live show because I'm away next Monday, but the one after, we'll be right back with you. Have a great week, folks. I will catch you soon. Ta-da.